Hey there gamers, and welcome back to another Blender tutorial where today I'm going to be showing you how to make a photorealistic cartoon bomb, which is kind of a weird dichotomy. I'm back from my trip, by the way, so everything kind of feels a bit weird. Talking feels weird, touching this mouse feels weird. I'm like, I'm not supposed to be doing this with my hand, I'm supposed to be pushing a cart. Anyways, for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, you must be very confused. So let's just get into the tutorial. I'm going to be making a photorealistic bomb. You're going to learn a lot about materials. How do you make this nice detailed bomb material? How do you make a geometry-based, so it's not material-based, but a geometry-based rope that actually whittles down? How do we do the particle system? And a lot of other tricks in between. So modeling, material, well, whatever. Okay, I'll show you how to make it. Again, the inspiration are these cartoon bombs that aren't very realistic, but still have the word bomb in it. So I'm very concerned about like search engine stuff. Either way, let's get started. So I'm thinking the fastest way to get where we want to be is starting off by modeling the bomb. Dude, talking feels so weird. So weird. The bomb is basically a sphere with a cylinder on top of it, but we somehow want to fuse these elements together so we don't just have intersecting geometry. In other words, we need to model it or do some modifier stuff. So I'm going to start off with a UV sphere. I'm going to Control 2. Why Control 2? Because that's the shortcut for adding in a subdivision surface of level 2. If you do Control 3, you know, subdivision surface of level 3. Take that, apply it. Now we have a thing with much more geometry. And what we need to do is, again, we need to have a cylinder coming out the top of this, and, you know, you could just add in, like, a cylinder here and do some, like, it would take a lot of work. So here's what I recommend. We're just going to model it. I'm going to say that the cylinder is going to be roughly, and this is dependent on what you want, this big. So I'm just going to delete this loop, and then once we've done that, hover over this, hit L for linked, not for lobotomy, or just delete it. Okay, that's a fast way to do it. So just delete the section that you think is kind of the size of the base of the cylinder of the bomb. Okay, cool. One thing you might not notice, and this is a factor that comes from subdivision surface, this loop might not be perfectly circular because, and I'll undo to show you, you see subdivision surface does some weird stuff to the geometry. I think it might be very close, but assuming that it's not, we're just going to fix that. So just select this loop. We're going to run a toSphere command, which makes it more spherical, and you just set it to 1. It's going to look like nothing happened, but it's just going to make sure all those vertices are equally distributed radially. Okay? Beautiful. Take this. Again, I'm a bit out of practice. Take this, E for extrusion on the Z-axis, F for fill, and now you've made a cylinder coming out of it. And the benefit of doing it this way, why didn't we add in a cylinder, is because we can just bevel and make them look like they're fused together, which would be hard to do otherwise. I know, he does it all. He does modeling, both 3D and, you know, fashion. He does texture. What does he not do? Either way, this is kind of an easy way to make a cylinder thing on top, and you can control the height of it and whatever, okay? That's the mesh. Take this, make it shade smooth, and I think that's good to go. The next component being the only other component, the rope. How do we want to do that? Well, it's going to be a bit more complicated, especially if we want to do a geometry-based where the thing coils instead of having a material that makes it look like it's rope and not just a curvy cylinder. It's going to be a bit tricky, but it's a good technique. Here's what you do. We're going to start off by adding in a Bezier curve. This is a curve that the French love for its Bezier-ness. Just raise it above, rotate it so it's facing us. If we go to this view, it's facing us, and I'm just going to, in edit mode, position it roughly where I want it. So one end should be kind of like coming out perpendicular to the surface here, and then the other end you could either have it up here or curving down here. It's kind of up to you. So just position it in whichever way you see fit. I kind of want the ones that I looked at on Google Images, the coolest looking ones are the ones that have a bit of a up and down kind of thing to them. But generally they're pretty short. So you could either do something like this, or you could do like a long fuse. And you just scale and all that. Okay, cool. We have the thing. You're going to notice it's low resolution. How do we fix that? You take the resolution, you bring up the resolution. You're welcome. maybe something like 60. This is going to become super important once we actually do the coiling. So the first piece is the path that we've defined, the path of the rope. We did it. Now, how do we actually have the thing happen? Well, fast way, and I wouldn't recommend this, but this is the fast and easy way. By the way, let's save this. I'm going to call this, I already made one of these and I called it base, so I'm just going to call it bomb available on Patreon. Oh yes. Fast way to do this. Link in the description. Fast way to do this is you take the bevel, you increase it, that makes it, geometric. Either way, that's not what we want. We want the curviness, the twistiness, and here's how you do it. So we have one path defining the path of the thing, and now I'm going to add in a second path or a second curve to define the shape of the bevel that's going around it, right? This thing. To do this, I'm going to add in a curve, circle, and then in edit mode, I'm just going to make it into like a ropey thing. So I'm just going to position it off to the side, maybe by 1 unit, so like it's tangent to the thing. Duplicate this, so Shift D to duplicate, move it on the x-axis by -2, so now we have 2 circles touching each other, and you could just be fine with that. So you could have like 2 tubes is what we're essentially going to do, and have them curl, or you could go a bit further. I think for mine I used 3, but I think technically you usually use 2, unless you have like very expensive rope or something like that. So we might go back, but for now, let's use 2. And this is procedural or non-destructive in the sense that you can go back and fix it. So now that we've made this, I want you to imagine that we're taking this contour shape and kind of sweeping it along the path. That's what we're planning to do. So instead of bevel round, go to object, select the Bezier circle, and you can see it kind of works. Like it's somehow taking this and transposing it onto there, but it's too big. So go into edit mode, take the whole thing, scale it down. And you can see really what's happening is it's taking our path and making the contour go along it, which makes it look like there's 2. So basically, that's it. You now take this and we're going to twist it as if you were to actually make the rope. Like I watched Castaway recently. Castaway is a movie about Tom Hanks. He works for FedEx, so he's always stressed out about time. And then he, during one of the plane rides, it crashes, and now he's alone on an island for 4 years, and he has to live in this kind of like timeless state. Either way, he needs to make a lot of things, and one of the things he does is he makes ropes out of plants, and I think he weaves 2 things together. It was the point of that whole story. So to weave these together, here's how you do it in the 3-dimensional world. So you could try to like rotate or something like that. Doesn't work too well. So what I recommend, right-click, go to tilt, or shortcut Control-T, and you can see tilting is that kind of, deformation. So you could tilt by 1,000 just to see what that looks like. If you're happy with it, we can, we can tilt it again. So Control-T by another 1,000, Control-T by another 1,000. And what you're going to notice is as we keep doing this, it's going to start breaking down a bit. This is because of the resolution of our curve. So you got to make sure that is up as much as you can. I wonder if you can you go past this soft limit? Seems like you can. So yeah, you could tilt it even more. Yeah, I mean, really the tricky part here is like how much do you twist it until it doesn't look natural? I think that looks pretty okay. And again, you can mess with the original shape. Where is it? So it's somewhere here. Yeah, there we go. You can mess with the original shape and see what it does. So you can scale it only on the X or only on the Y. So if I scale it only on the X, you can see it makes it more like a braided kind of thing. It looks more ropey. So I recommend doing something like that. You can also, on the Y, just mess around with certain things, see what that gives you. I don't think I even did this on the original, but I think it looks pretty good. So either way, this is how you make a rope. You make a contour, whatever you want it to be. You do some tilting, which is synonymous with twisting. Okay, cool. How do we now have the thing happen with the fuse? Good question. So what I'm going to have is I'm going to have a 30-frame animation. On frame 1, it's going to be a unblown up bomb, and on frame 30, it's going to go all the way down to fuse. Since this is in the curve workflow, where we're just messing with Bezier curves and all that, we do have the start and end mapping. Once we select it, that lets us do the fuse thing. That's the nice thing about geometry, or doing this with a bevel geometry thing. You can just literally use this slider, whereas if you did it with a material that makes it look like rope, you don't have a good texture coordinate space to work with. Either way, so I'm just going to add in a keyframe, hover over this, hit I, go to the last frame, go to 0, so it's all spent up, and then hit I again, so you can see, whoop. These things tend to be linear, so it burns at an equal speed. It probably takes a bit longer than that too. Like imagine setting up that bomb and you got to run away within like 30 frames. You're not going to make it. Give them at least 45 frames, so it's a bit more of a slow burning fuse. Okay. At this point, we can also do the particle system, like the burning and all that, and we will. But I think at this point, let's take a step back and like do some materials. Okay, because we've done a lot of the geometry stuff. So for this, I'm going to be using cycles because it looks good. Just setting up basic things like a HDRI environment texture, load in an HDRI. Basically, this is the only one that ever exists. I always use a lead and haul market. Why? I don't know. I think it just gives me the nice reflections that I like or something. Oh, the sneeze is coming. Okay. Hit transparent to make it appear but not appear. The lighting exists, the reflections exist, but not doesn't exist in our viewport. Okay, so we have the thing. Let's make some fancy materials. So starting off with the actual kind of like metallic part of the bomb, what I want to do is I want to give it this kind of like half metal, half rocky looking thing. So it kind of looks industrial, but also kind of rugged in a way. I don't think, I mean, it's a cartoony thing, so it doesn't even matter. So that's the look I'm giving it. To do this, I'm going to make it metallic to begin with. So it's a metal, you know, it can reflect in all this. Pick a metallic color that's kind of dark. And the first thing we can do to add in a ton of detail is this roughness value, how shiny it is. We can make that vary over the surface. So I'm going to use a noise texture to do this. So you can see some areas are black, some areas are white, connected to the roughness. And now you can kind of tell, I don't know if it shows up over YouTube. Definitely does. We have shiny, not shiny areas, but we can make that much more intense and much more nice. So I'm going to add in a color ramp just to make it kind of higher contrast. And you can see it's very blobular when we do this. So bring up the detail. You could also maybe bring up the roughness, but let's see what that looks like. That looks pretty good. Only issue is now, since it's like either black or white with pretty sharp transitions, it's either going to be perfectly reflective or not that very rough. We don't want that, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this bottom handle where it's supposed to be the most shiny, and I'm just going to bring it up. So at minimum, it's going to be like some amount of roughness, and then it could be rougher, is the idea. So already we're getting a pretty, you know, interesting looking thing. We can do better. To make it look kind of rocky and industrial, I'm going to use a bump. So just take the same noise texture. We don't need anything different. Connect it to the height. This now turns it into, you know, fake normal information. You connect that. Now it kind of looks rocky. It's too intense. So just bring that down until it's like, that might be a bit too much still. Until it's like not too visible. So I don't know if it makes any sense for like, I mean, a metal can be a rough surface, but you can see now we have shininess and normal detail that kind of correspond with each other, which is the nice thing about this. I'm just going to bring up the roughness a tiny bit. Okay, so that's the start of it. I also want to add in a second layer of detail like char marks, which makes no sense because it hasn't blown up yet. And once it does blow up, you don't have the shell for it to have char marks on. Whatever, I'm going to add it. I don't care. So here's how you do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a diffuse BSDF, where you can use a second, you know, principled. This is going to be our chart area, and this is going to be, you know, what already exists. To distinguish the two, I'm going to add in not a white noise, but another noise texture separate from this one, so it's, you know, a bit different. I'm going to add in a noise texture with low scale and a color ramp, and this is going to be our factor map saying where do we want one BSDF, where do we want the other. So again, I want a lot of detail, and in this case I want it very rough. So you can see roughness kind of makes it look like that. I want it very rough, low scale, and let's see what that looks like. So I'm just going to mix these two together, so you can see it's either going to be one or the other. Instead of that, we use this factor flip it, and now you can see we have the previous material, but now with this thing kind of slapped on top. That thing that we're slapping on top, I want it to be a black BSDF. So let's see, this is the before and this is the after. It's not too visible, the transition, so we need to make it higher contrast. So you just bring these handles closer together, and now you can really see these char marks. So now we just bring this back until it's not as intense. And you can see here's the before and here's the after. It just adds in a bit of something. Again, makes no sense, but I like the way it looks. It really looks like we're making a cannonball, to be honest. And maybe I should do a cannon tutorial. Make sure to decimate that subscribe button if you want a cannonball tutorial. Okay, cool. We have this. By the way, one little detail I didn't add in my original that I might want to. Just a little something to indicate this is like the connection point. Might just add in a tiny bit of realism. Okay, so we've made the material for this. Let's make a material for the rope. Most of the detail is already baked into the shape of it, like the shadowing and everything. So I think all we need to do is just have a principled BSDF that is the right color. So make it like a ropey color, whatever that means. So kind of bright, but not too bright, and kind of reddish, orangish, and very rough. Shouldn't be reflective. And then finally, I'm just going to add in a bit of like, surface detail again with the noise texture, with a bump, connect this to this, this to this. You can see it adds in a bit of information. I'm just going to bring up the scale so you can see it just adds in some of that surface detail. So before, after. I think it makes it look more realistic. Make it less intense. So it looks less like a sponge and more like it has the quality of a rope. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Again, you can change the material. We can actually even change the shape, like the scale of it and all that. But at this point, I'm going to say that's good to go. So the final thing is making a particle system and rendering it in a way that looks good. So what I'm thinking is we already have this animation. Remember, we did some keyframes to the start and end mapping here. We somehow need to have a particle system that works with that. And your first instinct might be to make a particle system on this rope, which first of all, incorrect. And second of all, you can't add a particle system to a curved object. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to make a emitter in the shape of a sphere. So this is going to be our emitter. Let's make it tiny. So what I want this emitter to do is I want it to be on the tip of this as it burns away, and that's going to spawn particles. Easy way to do this is, remember, this is curve defined, the shape of this, so why not use a follow path constraint on our emitter. So I can just tell the sphere to be at some point along this curve, which is genius, I'll say. So I'm going to have it start off at -100. Weird thing about this constraint, please fix this. It's kind of like a -100 to 0 to 100 situation instead of 0 to 1. I don't know. So we got to do that. And then on the last frame, instead of keyframing to a number that makes sense, we got to go from -100 to 0. So we do that. You can see it almost works. First of all, let me make it even smaller. You can see they're a bit off sync from each other. Again, this is because the interpolation is different, so make sure this is also linear. And now you can see it kind of works. I haven't really figured out exactly why they're out of sync. Yes, there's a bit of curve that goes under here. Fine. But that doesn't really explain it. Either way, my solution to this is I just kind of go halfway in between, position this where it should be, add in a keyframe, and then it pretty much syncs. And if it goes out of sync here, add in another keyframe. If anybody knows why that happens, let me know. Either way, now we have an emitter that follows the fuse. To make it emit particles, you give it a particle system, and it kind of already looks correct, but we just need to make it look good. So this emitter, first of all, I want it to be invisible, like the actual sphere. And also on render, I want it to be invisible. I only want to see the particles, not the sphere going along the thing. We're going to take it. And by the way, if you want to get very advanced, we could add some blackening to the rope as it, but whatever. Not in this tutorial. Maybe a Patreon thing. What was I saying? We want particles, not the thing. So for the particles, I'm just going to add in another. It could be whatever. I'm going to make it a sphere. So this is going to be our particle. So we're going to instance this on every, particle. We're going to go to render, render as an object, which object? Our particle. So now it's just going to be emitting the sphere. To make it look good, you want to make the scale very tiny, add in a bit of randomness. So now you can see we already have something that looks pretty good. I want these, if you think about it, it's kind of like that candle you have sometimes, like at a birthday party. They're called sparklers or something like that. They're very short-lived particles. They kind of exist only for like right after they come out. So I'm going to take the lifetime of these particles and bring them down. So you can see already they just kind of come out and then they die instead of what we had before where they keep falling, right? So we have them die very quickly. Another thing is we want many more of them, so I'm going to do 10,000. And I want them to be a bit more chaotic and going out in every direction. So in the velocity, I'm going to randomize. And you just want to pick a good random value. So this is the before, just kind of all falls down because of gravity. And the randomize just adds in a bit of something. And we could also increase the normal, which is to say the speed that it ejects from the normal direction. And since it's a sphere, it's always outwards. So that looks pretty good. Two things we could do is if like the particle lives long enough that it's going to intersect with the surface, we can just make this a collision object. Why not? So it could bounce off of this. Again, there's not enough frames for that to happen, but whatever, it's free. And the other thing is you're going to notice, and we can make a material for this, but you're going to notice that these particles, they're just kind of like spheres, and of course they are, because they come from the sphere object. The way it's supposed to look is kind of like a sparkler, like these long streaks. We could achieve that not by turning the particles into cylinders, but instead, let's use a bit of motion blur. So into render, enable some motion blur. Let's see what this looks like. So we just render out a frame. And really all we care about is this. So you can see that these already, they still kind of look a bit spherical, but they already kind of look a bit more streaky. To make it more intense, bring up the motion blur even more. And now these should really be streaky, and that's what's going to give it that kind of like sparkler-y look. Like I think spheres work fine for this. So now all we have to do is give this a nice material. For the material, let's keep it simple. It's a glowing, spark, right? So make it so again, we're applying a material to this sphere, which is instanced. I'm going to add in an emission, so it's like this bright thing. As for how bright it is, I don't really know. Like, should it be lighting up the surface of this? Maybe. Whatever. I'm going to stick with 25. You can always go back. It does make the rope kind of like really bright. Maybe like somewhere in between, like 10. So again, remember everything we do here turns into streaks. So that's one thing we could do. Let's add in a bit of variation for the color. So particle info gives us, the info about these particles. So we can like have a random number for each of these generated, or look at their location, velocity, whatever. I'm going to use random, so I could randomize the color. I'm just going to mix RGB, connect this to the color, connect this. Basically what this lets us do is now pick two colors. So some of these particles can be red, some of them are blue. You see what I mean. So we just need to pick two sparky colors. So one of them should kind of be a yellowish white, and one of them should be a yellowish like red or something like that. Not that it's that visible with this level of emission, but let's see what that looks like. Oh yes, one thing about this is if you're going to render without caching, you need to play it back before you do that. Otherwise, it's not going to show where it's going to be. Okay, that looks pretty good. By the way, this red reflection is coming from the original particle, so you could just hide it or just move it away, whatever. So that looks pretty good. Again, we have the issue that I just talked about. I'm thinking let's bring down the saturation of this just a bit so it's not as colorful. Half as colorful is good enough for me. And then you cache the simulation once you're happy with it, but let's just render a frame. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So the rest of this is really going to be like making it glow in the correct places. So like in compositing, let's look at the render we just did. What I want to do is I want it to glow, so just add in a glare node. Again, this is something you can do in Eevee, not in post. You could just render it like this with bloom. But we're not going to do that, so let's see. One of these looks the coolest, probably fog glow. Whatever. I'm going to make this thing bigger, this thing smaller. It's going to make things brighter, and this is what's going to make it look like this like nice glowing thing. So before, after, and you can see we can isolate the glowing and then like overlay this on top. So for example, you could mix this now with the original. I think you add them together. And the benefit of this is now we have a slider where we can make it even brighter than it was before. And then you just like render this out as an animation. By the way, to cache out the particles, you go to particles, you go to cache, and then you click bake. And now we shouldn't have any render problems on whatever frame we're on. So it's going to render, then it's going to apply our glare, and it looks pretty cool. So there you go. I think that's the essence of this tutorial. 26 minutes. That is longer than I thought. Either way, there you go. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you enjoyed learning about geometry and materials and all this. This is the part of the tutorial where I'm like, oh, you've invested 26 minutes. You're more likely to join Patreon now. Kind of like foot in the door fallacy or like marketing technique. Either way, I do have a Patreon. It exists. Some reasons you might want to join is that you get this blend file, any other blend file I've ever uploaded, all at once you just join Patreon for $5 a month. Any blend file I've ever made. You also get early access to tutorials. That was crazy a bit ago when I was doing the hike. I uploaded 2 weeks or a week and a half worth of tutorials early. But usually it's only like a day or two in advance. So you can get early access. You can get exclusive tutorials that I'm going to start gearing back up next month now that I'm here. Other benefits exist. Check it out. Join a 700 to 800 people that are already there. And thank you to those people. Either way, that's it. That's the thing. I hope you learned something. I don't know what this is useful for, but you know, if this is the thing you needed for your project, I'm here to deliver. So, yeah, bye.